Letter sound knowledge is critical because of the complexity of the English language. It is the most complex alphabetic language that there is. And for a long time now, most people, not all people, but most people acknowledge that you do need to teach the letter-sound relationship quite explicitly. But just how that is done is increasingly becoming a matter of debate. I must say that I have changed my mind too about how this needs to be done after reading a lot of the research. I knew it had to be done. With a background in special education, I had been doing it even when that wasn't the fashion for children who struggled. But I didn't think it mattered really about whether you did it in a very separate way or whether you did it from the reading that you were doing. So I just need to talk about these two different ways of approaching it because the research has clearly identified one as being superior. The analytic method is teaching phonics and phonic knowledge, or letter sound knowledge, by looking at the words in the stories that you're reading, pulling the words out and seeing how they're made up. That's analysing, that's the analytic method of teaching letter sound knowledge from the words that you're reading. The other method is the synthetic method. Synthetic has nothing to do with polyester and nothing to do with plastic, and everything to do with synthesizing sounds, teaching children to blend. Synthetic is about synthesizing. That is the principle that we need to use when we read. We synthesize sounds and we put them together. Now, English is an irregular language, so that's not the whole picture, but it is the principle that children must understand if they are going to be independent readers. And increasing research has shown that a synthetic method for teaching letter sound knowledge is superior to the analytic method. And there seems to be a couple of reasons for this. Number one, if you're only taking words from the reading that the children are doing, it's too random and you can't be sure that you are covering the enormous range. It's a vast array of letters and letter patterns that children must learn. And you need to be very systematic about how you do that for beginning and for struggling readers. And it isn't systematic enough if you're only doing it from the reading that you're doing every day in the classroom. This is not to say if you use a synthetic method that you don't do a lot of reading. Of course, you still do a lot of reading. But addressing that letter sound knowledge in a completely separate way seems to have an advantage. So very early in the piece, so with 5-year-olds, if not earlier with some children, you're teaching them separate sounds, and you start with a few consonants and a couple of vowels, and the principle is that you choose those based on their ability to blend into words. So it's really good to start with vowel consonants like M, S, T, and perhaps A and I. You wouldn't want to use I and E because they sound and look quite the same. I, E, A and I sound quite different, and they're less confusing for children. So what we're doing is we're teaching a number of consonants and a couple of vowels, and as soon as we've got M, and A, we've got am, haven't we? A number of programs actually start with SATPIN, and they teach them very quickly. They might teach within a week, they might teach 5 or 6. And we used to think, that's far too much. Their little brains will explode. Their little brains don't explode. And we're finding that with children can pick this up very quickly, and once they get this idea that that's the way the English language works, it just seems to take off amazingly quickly. And so it's not this letter of the week and going through the letters of the alphabet in order. That's a very inefficient way of doing it. Children can learn this very, very quickly. So the principle is a few consonants and a couple of vowels and get them blending really, really quickly. And they need to be taught quite explicitly. We're showing them the letter and we're saying, this is the way we write down and you're getting them to repeat it, and you're asking them to identify it at the beginning of words, at the end of words, and when you're doing your reading, you're pointing it out then, but you're not coming from the reading. The meaning sometimes clouds the fact that you have to actually pay attention to these as separate sounds. The synthetic approach has actually been found to be superior in 5-year follow-ups, in 7-year follow-ups, when they look at synthetic approaches to teaching letter sound knowledge and analytic approaches. That's too important to ignore. There's no washout effect. These children are staying with their superior levels of reading ability 7 years down the track. So many programs have a washout effect. Another really exciting thing about this is that the gender difference disappears. Little boys are not behind little girls. We just thought that was the way of the world, that little boys didn't pick this up as easily as little girls. They do, if it's done in this way. That's evidence that we just can't ignore. So I'm really advocating a synthetic approach to it. And there are lots of programs that are out there that have actually done the hard work of working out all of these different letter patterns. So things like Spalding, Thras, Jolly, Phonics, they address these things. You don't have to go, teachers don't have to go out and find out and work it all out themselves. They may like to vary a little in the way they present it, but make sure that they address all of those different letter sound patterns, because if you're doing it randomly, you can't be sure that you're going to cover everything. And children, we don't want to allow for the fact that some children might miss out on some information. It's like, we've got the secrets of knowledge, but we're going to keep a few from you. No one would do that deliberately, of course, but with the best will in the world, always working from the books that you're reading will not cover the amount of knowledge that you need to cover. So if I can just encapsulate some of the big ideas. Teach the sound separately. Concentrate on blending. Teach it very explicitly and do it very, very systematically. Make sure that you do cover everything. I think they're probably the most important things about teaching blending and giving children the idea that that's what they have to be able to do. Now, of course, English doesn't always obey the rules, and we have a vast number of irregular words that we call sight words. The children just have to learn, and they have to be learnt at the same time as well. There's kind of these two parallel elements to a program of teaching letter sound knowledge, because, of course, we can't always apply just the blending. English is quite consistent at the letter cluster level, so teaching children through things like word families, the common rhymes like ATE, AKE, ING, IGH, lots and lots of words have these letter sound patterns or these letter cluster patterns within them. Now, teaching those through word families, really concentrating on them, is actually another way to really build this knowledge as well. So we have to teach them how to blend the regular ones and how to recognise the others very early, very explicitly, and in a very systematic way.